Stanford University.
Welcome to Stanford Medicine's 10th Annual Contemplation by Design Summit. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, the founder and director of Contemplation by Design. It is my great honor to introduce our speaker, Tania Singer. Dr. Singer is going to be speaking to us on the lessons from her ReSource and CovSocial Projects, ways of addressing a mental health crisis. Professor Dr. Tania Singer is a social neuroscientist and psychologist heading the Social Neuroscience Lab of the Max Planck Society in Berlin, Germany. She is a world expert on empathy and compassion and has a passion for creating bridges between fields that typically never interact, such as linking neuroscience with economics, science with arts, or science with spirituality. She has initiated and headed one of the largest meditation-based secular mental training studies on compassion, the ReSource Project, to study the effects of meditation on brain, behavior, and mental health. Linking such findings to the field of neuroeconomics, she developed a caring economics approach, developing new models of economy based on care and social cohesion. Lately, in the CovSocial Project, she tested the effect of short mental online training on mental health and resilience during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of her main aims is to help to translate this scientific knowledge into different arms of society to provide the basis for deep inner change, for larger societal change. Join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Tania Singer.
Hi, hello. Good morning to everybody. I know it's very early. In Berlin, it's late afternoon, so it will start getting dark soon. And thank you for the invitation. So I would probably start sharing my slides, right?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Hello again. Good morning. I will talk about a lot of things. So the idea is first to introduce you into one of this large-scale mental health meditation study, the ReSource Project, which is a one-year longitudinal study. Then I want to tell you a little bit how we actually define the social brain and what is empathy, what is the difference between empathy and compassion, and cognitive perspective taking, and then show you findings. Not all, because we have almost more than 60 papers out on the ReSource Project, but give you an overview and then show you how that led to the next study, which is called CovSocial. Because of COVID, we did a mental health study during the COVID pandemic, and we tested whether a low dose online mental training approach based on diets, on the partner-based exercises, could actually reduce stress, loneliness, and so on. And I will show you how the lessons we learned from it also motivated, transfer into society and application of it. So the ReSource Project, right? That's a very big study, very, very large, but we have learned a huge amount of this study, which was like 9 months long, 300 people, more than 90 measures. And then the CovSocial, it's a very, tiny in comparison to a ReSource because it was only 10 weeks. And you will say, okay, only 10 weeks, but compared to 9 months, it was only 10 weeks. And compared to the time we need to change habits, 10 weeks is actually not a lot. And only just 12 minutes a day, exercises per app online. And the backbone of both studies is really the question, how can we address global problems? And these problems existed already when I started the ReSource Project, writing grants in 2008, but they have not become better, but they actually got worse. So they exacerbated through the pandemic. So we have loneliness, some people talk about a loneliness pandemic or epidemic, because now loneliness hits also the 18 to 25-year-old, like a young cohort which typically is not thought to be lonely, right? It is more like the 80+ years. And the same is true for depression and even suicide rates going up in the 15-year-olds. So there is a huge, you could even say, mental health tsunami approaching with, stress. It's also associated with very strong individualism, probably also social media use. We can discuss that if you want in the Q&A. And obviously we have macro problems like climate crisis, poverty in the midst of plenty, and many more. So that's, just to, we have 2 wars, one in Europe and with Ukraine. We have now a new war in the Middle East. We have a lot of climate related problems, fires. So a lot to do. And we wanted to know, can we actually use these meditation-based mindfulness, contemplative practices, but in a very secular manner, to increase social cohesion, social connectedness, empathy, compassion, pro-social behavior, cooperation, and also resilience to address, mental health problems and stress. And so that was our aim, to design this 9 months intervention program, training program, the ReSource project. And you see here that there were, like in the early years of mindfulness research, it was about, MBSR, 8 weeks, but there were a lot of different practices mixed up like in a big mixed salad, right? And then you were measuring pre-post, whether it helped reduce stress. But we were more interested to know and to go beyond that and to know which type of practice is actually doing what. Because meditation is nothing else, as you know, like cultivating your brain, your mind, your heart, your body responses. And it really matters what you practice, probably, but we didn't know enough about that. So the first 3 months were really just having practices which you would in contemplative tradition call shamatha practice, attention-based meditation practices, where it's really about presence, getting your mind into the present moment, whether it's your breath, focusing on your breath, or sounds, or vision, or taste, doesn't matter, or open presence, really about stabilizing your mind. Now the module in red, it's red because it's a heart-based model. It's all about care. It's all about increasing loving kindness, compassion, gratitude, positive emotions, and care. And then the green module, and all the data are color-coded to make the life easier, right, to understand. They are like cognitive, socio-cognitive modules. So this is about a meta-cognitive awareness on self and other people's mind, what is also called theory of mind or cognitive perspective taking. They are like synonymous. And you see, we have 2 cohorts. One does the affect first and then the socio-cognitive, and the other does perspective first, the socio-cognitive module, and then the compassion-based affect module second. So we can compare directly the specific effect of a type of exercise, right? Whether it's emotional training or more metacognitive, socio-cognitive training, or whether it's attention-based. And that was really what we were really interested in, to juxtapose and compare these different types of practice in their effect on different markers. And then we had these heroes, the no training group, the retest control group, which were just doing nothing. They were basically tested with 90 measures every 3 months like the others, but they didn't learn anything. So they were really the altruists. And we had 17 teachers with whom I designed 2 years, the 9 months protocol. It's a huge book. And you see, we went at the beginning of a 3 months module, we went into a retreat, 3.5-day retreat. You see them sitting there. And we had an app, and the app allowed that we would do 2 core exercises of each module every day at home. So 30 minutes at home through the app. And which types of core exercise you did at home. So it's important also, people have misunderstood that. It's important to know that the resource project included many, many more meditations, but these were just the 2 you did through the app at home as a regular practice. So in the presence module, you had breathing meditation and the body scan. In the affective compassion-based care module, right, you had a classic loving kindness meditation done alone. And then we had the so-called affect diet. And you see these 2 people sitting in front of each other in the symbol. That's a symbol for diet. And I will come later to explain more about this intersubjective relational mindfulness practice, because this is also the focus of this year's topic, right? So I have studied these diets a lot in the recent decade and years, and I will focus on that later a bit more. So you see, the affect and perspective module are both social modules because they are about social emotion or about social cognition, depending in which module. And so you also have a perspective diet, meaning an intersubjective relational practice to train your brain every day in perspective taking, in taking the perspective of the beliefs and thoughts of another being. And we can come later to how this practice works. And then the other is a classic, thought observation meditation. So as I said, we had huge amount of measure. I can only give you a glimpse, like from genes, lots of questionnaires, functional, structural brain measures, genetic, autonomic measure, even virtual reality. We had an app so we could also do a momentary ecological assessment, like beep, beep, beep in your daily life. How was your sleep? What are you doing right now? How are you feeling? And we had a lot of computer games like cognitive tasks, computer-based tasks to measure attention, compassion, empathy, and so on. So before I come to these results, right, I want to go a bit deeper, because a lot of people ask me, why these 2 modules? Why separate affect from perspective, especially meditation teacher who usually mix it up. And that is also to do because of my expertise in social neuroscience. And from social neuroscience, we know that the social brain is actually very complex, and that there are different networks supporting different social capacity and skills, and that empathy is actually not compassion, even though both are social emotions and can be activated when you are confronted with suffering of others. It is very different, and I'll talk about that. And then the cognitive perspective, the green module, right, is another network in the brain. It's a cognitive mentalizing network. And this is why we have to understand how complex the social brain is to know how to train it and how to change it. So, of course, there is not a single definition about what empathy is, right? There's like in philosophy, clinical psychology, everyone has a bit different understanding, but at least we have some convergence in the empirical, psychological, social neuroscience, science, developmental psychology. So empathy is really, as we define it, sharing an emotion. So if you are happy, I'm happy. If you are suffering, I'm suffering. But it is not emotion contagion, meaning I have a self-other distinction. This is why this box is around empathy and compassion. I know that the suffering I'm now sharing with you is from you. It's not my own suffering. I am aware that you are the trigger, the source of what I'm feeling vicariously now. So I have a self-other distinction, and for compassion and perspective taking the same, right? And this cognitive perspective is more a reasoning. It doesn't feel in your body, right? There is no pain or happiness or joy or disgust or emotion which you share, but it is knowing that you believe in something, right? In freedom, or that you are not free, or that you should vote or not vote, things like that, abstract. And when I was in London in 2004, I did one of the first experiments in neuroscience on empathy. And what we found is that if you see the suffering, the pain of another being, you activate this anterior insula and the MACC, like a part of the anterior cingulate cortex here, depicted in blue on this symbolic brain. When you feel pain, but also when you share the pain with another, when you empathize with the pain of another. So you really resonate basically by activating networks which code for the feeling in yourself, the respective feeling, when you see someone else experiencing the same feeling. However, cognitive perspective taking, and I think, this slide is a very old one, Israel-Palestina conflict. It couldn't be more, up to date. When I saw this slide, I was like, my God, if I would have known that this slide would become so salient again, because we are in the middle of a war. But to basically understand the complexity of this war and the conflict, you cannot just, have empathy or compassion. I'll come to compassion later. You also need to have this cognitive perspective taking so that you can put yourself into the belief system and minds of others and understand why they would do these actions, so that even though you might be totally incongruent to your own belief system or thoughts, right? You need to creep really into the mind of the other, especially in conflict resolution. This is really important. And when we do brain imaging on these different networks, by showing, videos where you have to do this theory of mind or perspective taking, or you have to resonate with the emotion or go in compassion with others, you can see that there are two different networks in the brain which are processing, on the one hand, these cognitive perspective taking, also called theory of mind or mentalizing in green. No, it's very much overlapping with the default network. And marked in red, these are limbic, paralimbic structure like the anterior insula, MACC, or orthothalamus, which are really important for processing feeling states, emotional states, bodily states. And when you think, okay, there is a red network, there is a green, of course, in the brain, they are not colored, right? That's just for you guys. The important thing is to go even deeper and to differentiate between these two emotional motivational phenomena, empathy and compassion. So we already learned what empathy is, right? It's sharing, it's getting into emotional resonance with the feeling of the other. It can be joy, it can be any feeling, it can be suffering. Compassion is typically reserved to suffering. So it's a reaction and a response to suffering of someone else. But it is more a feeling of warmth, of concern. It's not an emotion, it's a motivation. It's rooted in the care system, an affiliation care system. And it really is the motivation to want to help the other. And we did huge amount of experiments, with Buddhist monks who are like expert in meditation, but for the time constraints, I only show you one study done with Olga Klimetsky, and as in her PhD with naive people who had never worked on, compassion, meditation, or empathy. And if we induced and taught them empathy, these, empathic network and anterior insula, which you saw before, for the pain got stronger. The functional activation in functional brain networks got stronger after training, but also the negative affect, right? But when you then, the same people trained them in compassion, into this care motivation, into this unconditional love, really, this motivation, the altruistic motivation to help, you had this other network here, which is more like a reward network, if you want, like MOFC, nucleus accumbens, so on, which lighted up. And that came with more like feelings of warmth, of love, of support, of concern. So we developed a model for the ReSource project, how to teach people to recognize a very healthy empathic resonance response. If we wouldn't have this empathic healthy response, we'd probably be psychopaths, right? This would not be good. It's a social glue. It tells you that there is a need to do something because someone's suffering. But there is this danger to go into empathic distress. And so we teach through long mental training sessions and retreats how to recognize a healthy empathic response and then transform it into a compassionate, caring response to activate the care system instead of going into empathic distress. And we also teach, and I teach that a lot to healthcare provider these days in my free time outside of my science, to how to recognize empathic distress and how to use self-compassion to move out of empathic distress into compassion again. Because one part of the huge burnout rate in healthcare profession are obviously structural, but also because it's not taught how to deal with so much trauma and stress and suffering. And then you end up in empathic distress and burnout on a long run. So to come back to the resource project, because we knew about these different networks, we thought we have to devise different practices, different training practices to actually elicit plasticity and changes in these different networks with different exercises. And so the big question was, did it work? Because, I grew up and people said, no, gray matter volume in your brain, it's like the hardware of your brain, right? It's just decreasing. It's like when with age, it gets less and less. It's like atrophy, age-related atrophy if you get older. And our sample here was not the youngest, right? They were like 43 of age on average. So could we actually increase structural brain plasticity, also increase the thickness of gray matter volume in the brain we can measure through training, right? Could we induce structural brain plasticity? That was a big question. And then a lot of people said these soft skill, empathy, compassion, perspective taking. This is soft skill. This is kind of voodoo. You can't train that, right? You can train motor functions and then, you get bigger gray matter representation in your finger, but not empathy, compassion. So we were really very curious to see, could we actually get, increases in gray matter in these networks we know from social neuroscience and in attention network, because you remember the first module was attention-based mindfulness module, the presence module, and that was attention network. And here is the finding. It was quite astonishing. It took huge amounts of years to get this data. And you see an increase in gray matter volume, which is accompanied with an increase in attention on computer task, on Q flanker task as a classic attention task. And you see increase with the same people, but after they go through the compassion-based 3 months module, you see increases in this anterior insula and right SMG, this kind of empathy and compassion related areas. And then only after the 3 months of perspective taking diet, you see an increase in theory of mind task, very difficult theory of mind is like social intelligence computer task, which comes with an increase. Here you see the better you get in this computer task, the less errors you do in theory of mind, the more here, Tom, the more you have a thickening of the TPJ, and the temporal parietal junction is very known to be important in theory of mind. At MIT, Rebecca Sachse did a lot of work on that region. And you see here the anterior insula and also the ventral bank of it. The more compassion you develop, the thicker this limbic structure, paralimbic structure gets. So that was really exciting news. And then, we also tested many different stress hormones and stress questionnaires and markers. And so that is just one marker we assessed. It's a social stress test. It's a TRIA social stress test, where you basically stress out people who have to give a job talk in front of a committee in white codes, and they are really not friendly. They are like kind of judging and not giving you social cues. So you get really socially stressed in the sense that you feel like judged and not okay, and am I doing something wrong? And then you have to give you have to count backwards a huge number by 7, and then of course at some point you do a mistake, and then this committee would say start from beginning. And that really, this elicits typically this cortisol stress response. Now the body hormone cortisol in the body can be measured through saliva. And what was really interesting is that we would have thought that because of mindfulness-based stress reduction programs showing a lot of changes in questionnaires typically, and we also showed after 3 months presence changes in stress questionnaire. However, if you looked at the real hormonal social stress response, and I'm talking here of social stress, not other types of stress, you could not see any reduction after 3 months of attention-based mindfulness in this social stress. You needed to go through either after 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months. This didn't matter. It really was important to do one of these dyadic, these social modules where there is this interpersonal dyadic exercises. And only when you did that, you got a reduction of hormonal social stress response by 51%. So that really gave us the first hint that these diets might be really, really important to buffer you against the detrimental effects of feeling judged and not appropriate and having this social stress. Because every day someone listens to you is not judging you, you are sharing really intimate stuff. I'm coming to that in a minute. And you still, are loved and liked, and you can just share your vulnerability. So I will show you that we tested this hypothesis then in the CovSocial project, where we only looked at diet and compared it only to mindfulness, because in the ReSource project, everything was together, right? You did classical meditation with diets together in each module. Okay, so then cooperation, we found a similar thing for the time being. I just focus here on one finding. If you really look at, economic games where you play for money and you play these game theoretical paradigms used in economics, to see, how much trust, how much donation behavior you have, how much you would give another person, just like that. Only the compassion-based module was really able to boost this altruistic motivation and behaviors. You see it here in red. And that was true for after, 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months of training duration. Okay, so now let's move to these diets, this interpersonal new format, you could say, because even though diets have been used in MBSR, in the teacher training, now it's called inquiry method. The type of diet work we developed for the ReSource project is very, very different from most of what I've seen so far when people say they're using diets in a retreat or so on, because we developed these partner-based exercise as a real skill training approach, meaning skill training approach is not just in a retreat to get a deeper reflection on, when you look, this is how typically, diets in a retreat, when you look from eye to eye, someone into the eye, and then someone asks you a question and you reflect basically like a loud meditation on this question. And that can be used in retreats to go deeper, for example, in a given practice you just had, and then say, explore what it did to you or how it felt, or, which difficulty you had or whatever. We did it, however, through our app as a daily telephone call. So we had, of course, diets in the retreat and in the weekly 2-hour session with the teacher. We also did diet face-to-face, but as a daily practice, because we really, in a way, wanted to foster skills like empathic listening, care, activate these neural networks I showed you of compassion, empathy, through this daily skill training. And for that, you need to repeat it. No, one time is not enough. You would also not go in a fitness club and think that your muscle would grow after being one time on on one of these machines. You have to do that very regularly over many weeks and months. So the affect diet, one of these dyadic daily practices, worked like that, because this is also important. The questions we have, I developed these questions not just randomly, but for a whole year I piloted with a very good friend of mine, these yin-yang question. There are always two questions. And the first one in the affect diet is to really train interoceptive body awareness, interoception, and accepting difficult emotion, or it's like what is also called vipassana on difficult emotion, you could say. So, I'm calling my partner, which is randomly attributed to me, and I say, please tell me a situation in which you felt a difficult emotion in the last day, because you do it every day, and how did that feel in your body? And then the speaker has 2.5 minutes, so it's very short. You have to get used to the short windows, but we needed to do that short because every day over 3 months, right, in your daily life, in the middle of your busy life, you have to do this exercise with someone on the phone. And then you explore, what does it do to my body when I'm stressed, when I'm angry, but with a very concrete situation which happened in your daily life. And then there is a gong, so it's very tacted, right? There is no room for chit chat or conversation or giving advice or anything. The listener is only just empathically, non-judgmentally, presently listening. And then it's like, thank you for sharing. And the second question is, now give me a situation of the last day where you felt gratitude, and how did gratitude feel in your body? And then again, 2.5 minutes, then the gong, then thank you, and then you change roles. So the speaker becomes the listener and the listener becomes the speaker. So it's a very, very democratic exercise. And depending on the type of diet, there can be very different diets, training, let's say, different skills, different circuitry in your brain and body. So the affect diet was developed to train empathic listening, acceptance of difficult emotion, gratitude, care, self-compassion, interoceptive body awareness, and then also social connectedness and social cohesion with the other, which every diet has, because we're changing partner every week. So that's another very specific feature of our approach. And we are teaching a lot of do's and don'ts and a lot of how to do it right. So we have a huge curriculum around how we teach diets. The perspective diet is much more complicated. It's based on internal family system approach, inner parts, and you are learning to take a metacognitive on internal personality parts and recognizing from which beliefs and inner parts another person is talking from. So theory of mind. Now in the research project, people said, Tania, you are totally crazy. I mean, not just that you ask people to do 9 months every day, 30 minutes, but now they have to share vulnerable stuff with a person they don't know, and they change every week, and they have to find a rendezvous every day in their busy lives, in their work lives, or family lives, or whatever lives they have, but it's always busy, and do that, right? They will never do that. And the good news was, I don't have the slides here, but most of the people did the diets as much as the classic meditation they can do alone, where they don't need, to coordinate with a partner, and even more sometimes. And they absolutely loved them. And when we asked them before and after a diet with these circles, how close did you feel to this other person on the other end? How connected did you feel before and after the diet, right? What you see is that both types of diet, the socio-emotional and the socio-cognitive diet, they are very different, but both let people on average feeling much closer after the diet to a person. But what was even more remarkable is here on the right side, these dots show that how close do you feel to a person from week to week when you change partner, right? So you don't know the partner at the beginning of the week. It's a new one. And how do you feel before you even started the diet? And that's really generalizing. And from week to week to week, people felt more and more close to the other partner. And especially for the affect diet. And that also shows up if we ask, how personal was the story and the stuff you shared with the partner. You see that it gets more and more personal from week to week to week of the training, meaning that you feel more and more in trust, more and more connected, more and more social cohesion. So it was really astonishing. And, before I even saw the data, we could see the modules where we did diet in the retreat were like social glue. The people really kind of grew together like a family. It's really like social cohesion glue. And so it really also induced, like shared humanity, common humanity, feeling of connectedness and interdependence. So summarizing this large 9-month study, right? It's a lot on my webpage if you're really interested in all these 60 papers. But I think one message is, even when we did, phenomenological qualitative interviews, it showed up that each practice has its very own unique, let's say, fingerprint. For the people, it feels very different if they do breathing meditation, or whether they do a diet, or whether they do a metta meditation of observe. They even see different colors. They feel it in different parts of their body. So it really matters what you practice. And we saw that also in the brain, right? Depending on what you practice, which practice you do, whether it's attention-based mindfulness or compassion-based or perspective-taking based, you elicit brain plasticity in different networks, and it comes with changes in different behaviors, whether it's getting better in attention or better in social cognition theory of mind, or improve compassion, empathy, prosocial behavior. And I didn't show you the body awareness data, but the stress data. We could show that in the terms of hormonal social stress, only the modules which had these relationship practices in it really could reduce social stress. And that made us really, really curious, right? And it took me a long time to really be able to do this experiment, to see what if we just take the diet out of the context of this huge, resource project. Because the problem is many people ask me afterward, and especially when the data came out, could we have the protocol? Could we do that? But 9 months, with 3 days retreat at the beginning, 2 hours weekly coaching. I mean, it's huge. It's not very scalable for education, healthcare, hospitals, right? So in a way, there was an open question first about what is the pure effect of just doing an affect diet, for example, every day, not in combination with all the other meditations. And could we do just much shorter training, like 10 weeks or 8 weeks instead of 9 months or 3 months, to scale it, right? And that was really funny. I mean, how it's always like that, right? You have that in your back mind. And then I moved to Berlin in 2019, fully to Berlin. I was already doing, but I was also in Leipzig. And the CovSocial Project basically came in because we were in a pandemic, right? We were locked up like everyone else in this world, I guess, in 2020, early 2020, in the pandemic. And so we used the ReSource project app because we couldn't go into scanner or lab anymore. And we said, let's test the mental health of a lot of Berliners, which, we gathered from a city register randomly, and just check their resilience, social cohesion, and mental health throughout this pandemic. And that's a huge cooperation project with a lot of partners from other universities in Berlin, from the Charité, from the Humboldt University, also Max Planck in Munich for psychiatry, who did the genetic part, and our social neuroscience lab of the Max Planck Society in Berlin. This is my postdocs and PhD of the CovSocial Project, Sarita, Malvika, and Hannah, and I will show you published and non-published data of that study. But first, the first phase was, you could say, a descriptive. We were following people from before the pandemic in January 20. First lockdown was in March, April in Berlin. Then in June 20, people thought in Germany, oh, it's over. That was strange, funny thing. And everyone went into vacation, went out, But then second lockdown, we went all back into a 6 months lockdown. It was a never ending, really, really long lockdown, very severe. So we everyone could participate who knew German, because we had huge amount of questionnaires in German to fill out through the app, access to an app, and they were very representative from different areas of Berlin, and also in terms of age group and, you know, like income. They were rather representative sample. And we had 3,522 who really filled out all the questionnaire of the first 3 measurement time point, which were huge, like three hours or more of just filling in different types of resilience, mental health questionnaire, socio-demographic, social cohesion. And they were from 80 to 65 years old. And in the first phase, we were in the middle in the lockdown, so we could assess mostly questionnaires and some genetic markers. We sent like pipettes, salivates to them at home. But the second phase, I will come more in detail to that. This is the training study, because in the second phase, we said, look, instead of just seeing the whole Berlin population getting worse and worse, let's do something about it. And here we could get them into our lab. So this is from a brochure, which is freely available from our webpage. This is the pattern you see also in other studies from different countries in the world, actually very typical pattern in a way. You see here 4 vulnerability marker: depression, loneliness, anxiety, stress. You see with the red curve, before the pandemic, you know, depression had the normal levels you would see in a Berlin sample, also German sample. Then you had the shock effect, right? You had depression, anxiety, stress going up, loops, in the first lockdown, you know, finding yourself locked up at home in a city. Then the reopening in June, people had a lot of resilience. They almost bounced back on average to their baseline level, right? There's like they bounced back. But then came this never-ending second lockdown, these 6 months never-ending, like from months to months to months, more depression, more loneliness, more stress, more anxiety. And we call that fatigue effect. And another effect you can find in many, many other studies across the world is that the females were suffering more than the males, and the youngest cohorts of studies. So here you see in our study, our youngest cohort was 18 to 25, right? And you see they were already more depressed and lonely at the beginning, before the pandemic hit. But then you see this red line being even more steep during the second lockdown. So the youngest cohort suffered most from the lockdowns. And you see this in all studies. You see it here with another data set of ours, much more clear. This is positive and negative affect, right? This is the affect grid. So Berliners are pretty pleasant, positively, you know, their mood is positive, pleasant, affect is dominating outside of the lockdown before. Then they go in lockdown, negative emotion. Then they come out of lockdown, it bounces back to positive. And then you have this fatigue effect, especially at the end of these 6 months lockdown. The negative affect goes beyond what you saw in the first lockdown. And again, you see the women are much more affected from this negative affect in the lockdowns than the males. And also, again, the younger cohorts, middle cohorts. And we could also really, you know, that's a model we had. We have a theoretical paper out there which suggested that we could look at resilience throughout the COVID pandemic as a dynamic process, right, of recovery and cumulative vulnerability effects. And I don't want to go deeper into this resilience model, but I think what was really interesting is that with our theory, we were very close to the actual real data. So, you know, like the theory would predict that there are some people, you know, who are super non-reactive, you know, the Buddha bears, and they're just totally resilient. They are not reacting to any lockdown or whatever happens. And then the yellow curve is basically showing these chronically very, very highly vulnerable people who are basically already on ceiling, right? And then you have these interesting curves in the middle. That's what our theoretical approach, where you have an acute stressor, but the green one, they recover fast, whereas the wet ones are not so good at recovering, right? They don't go back to baseline. And then they show this cumulative, effects of vulnerability over time. And so we built with the real data, right? With the real CovSocial data we had, we could actually model an overall resilience vulnerability factor out of many, many mental health and resilience scales. And using this latent factor, we could see we have this shock effect, right, which I told you already, and this pandemic fatigue effect. But now you see on the right side, left is our model, and on the right side is what we really see in the data. And we have, in a way, these four groups, right? But the interesting thing is there is no one not reacting to a lockdown. Even the most resilient one now, the blue one, they have a little like shock effect, oops. But they show, of course, overall much higher levels of resilience to start with and also at the end. But they still reacting. But you see in comparison, the dark blue on top, they have a huge, stress response to the lockdown, and they don't recover at all in the reopening, right? There's like, they don't go back to baseline like the light blue. And also, even though it's not super visible, but when you test it statistically, their fatigue effect is steeper than the resilient groups. And here again, you see what I told you already. People with lower household income have a higher probability to end up in these vulnerable groups. People with a psychiatric diagnosis, younger people, which is counterintuitive, right? And females. And if you want to read more about, also like data from America, from Israel, from all over Europe, from different countries on the effects of the pandemic on mental health, you can go on our webpage, because we have an online brochure with and talks of a conference we gave on that, international conference, freely available, with talks from studies from across the world on that. But now coming back to our diets, not to relational practice and to mental training and meditation, we thought, okay, this is horrible, right? The whole world is suffering here. Our Berliners getting more depressed, lonely from months to months. Can we do something about it? Can we reverse these effects? Can we reduce stress and loneliness? Can we, help stress reduction, social skills, build up resilience, mental health? And so we entered phase 2. And what we did now, as I said to you, we applied a just online low dose intervention approach compared to the ReSource project. So one group would only do practices we have from the presence module, right? Classic mindfulness, breathing, or sound, or open presence, attention-based mindfulness exercise, is probably a lot of you know and practice perhaps already, but done alone. And then we would juxtapose and compare that with a 12-minute affect diet. So we had one group, the socio-emotional training group, the diet group, the partner-based diet group, doing affect diets 12 minutes every day. And then we compared that with the mindfulness-based training group and a waitlist control. And the waitlist control would just not do anything but be pre-post tested like everyone, and then do a diet training later. Yeah. And then we had 4 teachers. They would do 2 hours coaching for 10 weeks, once a week, with a group of about 24 participants. We had about, 80 to 100 in each cohort with attrition, and we had this app. So one group would do this affect diet by calling each other 12 minutes with a partner changing, like in the ReSource project I told you, and the others would do 12-minute mindfulness, and both would become coached and deepening their practice and instructed once a week by the same teachers online for 2 hours over 10 weeks. And now I'm showing you, this is non-published data, but really interesting, the compliance. So this is the compliance of the 2 main cohort during, and you see the compliance is very high, but you see already an effect which we saw later even stronger, that the people doing diet, the compliance just stays 100%. The people who could download meditation, mindfulness meditation alone at home to practice with the app, from week to week, there's a slight tendency to decline, right? Even though they were in the middle of the course. Then we asked both groups, because they asked us actually, whether they could continue using the app after the 10 weeks, after the post-test. They wanted to continue, some of them. And so we said, okay, let's just keep the app open and also allow the diet group to be coupled. You know, we always need to couple them with partners. No, we have to do pairs, random pairs. And so when you look, and that was really interesting in the continuation, first, there was a much higher continuation rate to start with in the diet group than in the mindfulness group. And then you see this red curve. You have to only look at the red curve. The pink is not meaningful. Is really basically flat, meaning that the compliance stayed very, very high for the diets over 10 weeks, because you have a rendezvous, right? You don't want to let the other down. You don't want the other to be alone if you have a rendezvous. And with mindfulness, it's much more difficult. If you don't have a group, a course context anymore, Sangha, someone who is like, you know, watching you, from day to day to day, you practice less, because, you know, we are humans, right? We know how that works. And Hannah Mateos, a PhD of mine, she looked at the loneliness state on this most famous loneliness scale, UCLA loneliness scale. Only the diet group compared to the retest, not the mindfulness in yellow, could actually reduce loneliness. The pink group, we have to be a bit cautious interpreting the data, because there were fewer, right? There is about half, a little bit more than half of what the other cohorts had in terms of sample size, because they were a waitlist control, right? They were, and some dropped out just because of it's very late when we did the diet with them. So just focus mostly also on the red group, but you see the pink ones, even though they are less reliable, to show the same trend. And the same is true for the ecological momentary assessment. So over many days before in pretest, we peeped people in the middle of their day and we asked, how lonely do you feel now? So it was like before the intervention started. And then we averaged these event sampling data points on loneliness over many days and weeks in pretest. So it's a more, let's say, ecologically valid everyday measure of real felt loneliness in your day. And you see again that the diet group was much more efficient in reducing this daily assessed loneliness as compared to the mindfulness group. And that makes sense in the sense that it is an interrelational practice, and you feel less lonely if you are connected every day with another being. On the daily report, so when you do your practice, whether it's a mindfulness meditation or a diet, you feel less lonely after doing whatever practice you did, whether it's mindful or diets, but the diets have, again, stronger effects. And then we could replicate, you feel much more close after doing a diet to your partner in both groups than before you do a diet. So you have the social connectedness effect again here. And then we ask an even more difficult question, right? Because we measured again in the TSST the hormone cortisol, but now remember, low dose, only online, only 12 minutes, much smaller sample. So I would not have thought that we get any significant effects, to be honest, because it was very conservative, high risk. So we know already this task, right? They came in the lab, they got stressed socially. And we see again the effect we had seen in ReSource, but now we know it's really the diet. You see here the diet, the red group, doing 12 minutes diet with the group doing 12 minutes mindfulness, and the retest group doing nothing on this TSST. And you see that the significant reduction into cortisol response to the social stressor is only present in the diet group after the diet training. so we looked at many more questionnaires and scales. So overall, it's really wonderful because both groups, both 10 weeks online training group, if you look at questionnaire here, have less emotional regulation difficulties. So you could reduce significantly emotional regulation difficulty, anxiety and depression. You could boost self-compassion, other related compassion. You could reduce alexithymia. And now comes the differential effects. So while on a scale, stress recovery scale, the mindfulness group did better, the diet group was the only one which could really boost resilience on this well-known large resilience scale, like optimism, social support, and all these kind of qualities, right? Positive outlook of life. And here we had something even more, let's say, going away from just questionnaire. We had a task which could measure through reaction time and scrambled word task implicit whether you have a tendency to see the world in a negative way or in a positive way. It's called negative interpretation or positive interpretation bias. And we could show here that after 10 weeks only, online 12 minutes diet, only the diet group got more positive. And that is very much like with this boost in resilience and care system. And we could also show that, I showed you the data, only the diet could reduce loneliness, increase social connectedness, and decrease stress. So now we said, okay, we have a scalable approach now, right? We know that this is enough to really basically help. We helped the Berliners in this COVID time when they came out, because we didn't go into a third lockdown actually. And so we started to transfer these things into society, and we are now building up a follow-up project called EduSocial. EduSocial project, because we want now to educate people in different fields of society. So we want to educate people in the field of healthcare and schools, education, and basically train them in this dyadic work so that we can boost resilience, because the burnout rates in these professions are just huge. And the dropouts in hospitals and schools, at least in Germany, it's the case, are just massive. So these people really need support. And if you can boost resilience at the same time, improve social skills, soft skills, but they're actually not soft, as I showed you, we can really help these systems. And so we will also develop system change measures, not just individual change measure, but how does classroom atmosphere, or how does, a system like a hospital or like a department in a hospital is actually profiting from people doing these interrelational subjective practices every day for some weeks. And so we are recruiting postdoc PhD if you feel like inclined or following, and coming. I'm also giving in my free time masterclass where I do the 3 days retreat and then 8 weeks diets from home. And I did that with a French healthcare worker in the middle of the pandemic here on the left. And that was just wonderful, because these healthcare workers were burning out like flies. They really couldn't, it was such a bad time for them. And, having these diets, connecting at the network from, back in Paris, Bordeaux, and with, this cell phone, doing these self-compassion practice, affect diet practices were absolutely beautiful for them. And the feedback was just overwhelmingly positive and beautiful. And so I'm giving these masterclass regularly to introduce, people into this work. And that's thanks to my CovSocial group. That was the group which was really behind this pandemic project in the last 3-4 years, which really deserved the thank and the gratitude. I showed you the data. These are the 4 meditation teachers. And this is the webpage. You find huge amounts of web material on this webpage. Tania Singer.de, my private webpage, has most of all the talks, podcast materials, and so on. Thank you very much.
Tania, thank you. from the depth of my heart and mind for your wisdom and how you've expressed it in pro-social ways to serve humanity and the health for all. I'm going to pose the first question. Given the power of the different modalities of intervention, in your intake data, did you collect any information about prior exposure to any contemplative practice?
Yes, so in both studies, we were actually quite severe, and we excluded everyone who had actually already experienced, meditation in one way or the other. So nobody could take place who had already a meditation daily practice. And if they had yoga practice, we did not exclude, because at least in Germany, yoga is more like sports. It's not so much, associated mostly with, teaching some specific meditation techniques, but it is. So that was okay, but everything which was related to meditation practice or some retreats were excluded. So because we really wanted to see first whether, people totally naive could learn it and how long it would take, and also really have a pure pre-post test effect, right? Like, because if you come with your practice, it comes with a lot of difficulty also, because you don't want to. Sometimes you are so attached to your specific type of practice you have learned that it's even more difficult to learn a new one.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because you compare it with the one you do since, years. And so it was a very secular training, of course. A lot of atheists were in our samples who have no, Buddhist background or any religious background. And that was also our goal.
Thank you. Very useful to understand that screening criteria. We have a question from a participant that says, did you do any study on the effect of metta, loving kindness meditation?
Yes. So in the ReSource project, the big 9 months project, one of the core exercises which the participant had to do every day together with the affect diet, right, was the metta meditation. So they did a metta meditation 20 minutes every day for 3 months of the affect module every day. And we could measure the what we call phenomenological fingerprints of how people actually experience the affect meditation. And we could compare that with the meditation they had to do in the other blocks, right? For example, one of the core meditation in the presence module was breathing meditation or observing thought. And we have a paper out from Tania Singer, which directly compares how people experience metta meditation as compared to, for example, breathing meditation. And it's very different. Metta meditation comes with opening the heart. You feel the region around the heart, and funny enough, the hands to be really activated and warm, probably because metta meditation comes with this motivation to help, right? You want to it's this caring motivation. So the hands are warm and want to help, they want to go. Usually people perceive, colors of wetness, open heart, warmth. The semantic is like a lot about love, a lot about this. And also the metta meditation was in the module, in this compassion-based module, the core practice with the affect practice, affect diet, which also probably was strongly behind the effects we see on, more cooperation, more donation, more compassion, more altruism. So we have a lot of experience with the metta practice. Now, it's not a scientific paper, but one observation, which I also share with Paul Gilbert, who uses, compassion-based therapy. Not everyone can enjoy metta meditation, because you have to imagine another being who loves you or who you love. And some people have really difficulties feeling safe and imagining a person where they would just have this pure feeling, right? If they imagine their mother, then there is a conflictual situation or relationship, and then it doesn't really work, and then they get frustrated. So my experience is that the partner-based dyadic affect also is like meta, right? It's very, very similar in the sense that you also have another person, but you don't imagine the other person is sitting there. It's like there. So you have a real person. That's another sometimes difficulty in the meta meditation. Not everyone is good in imagining inside of your brain, like visual imagery, a person. Some people say, I don't see the person, it's always fading away. In the dyad, you have a real person, so it cannot fade away, right? The real person is always there. So you practice with a real person, which is sometimes more easy actually to do for some people than the meta meditation, interestingly enough. And you still, you teach non-judgmental awareness, you teach self-compassion, you teach all these qualities of the heart. And because you change partner every week, you also teach shared humanity. You teach, listening to people you maybe not so liking. You think, now I have to do a diet with this kind of business guy. Oh my God. And then, you realize by listening to this vulnerable story, oh my God, he is actually such a nice guy and so vulnerable and so just a human, right? So a lot of what is taught in the meta practice, I think, overlaps, if not, is easier to do in an affect diet, especially for the non-trained brain.
Thank you. Building further into our understanding of the dyad practice, you referenced that there were 2 hours over the 10 weeks of what I understood to be on the phone coaching from your teachers. Could you help us understand a little more about how the dyads built their social skills, whether there was monitoring of the dyad conversation so that teacher was providing feedback? And what if one of the members of a dyad was observed to be less able at the dyad social skills of the interception and the vipassana, you said, the vipassana of toward the difficult emotion and situation? So how did that part work?
Yeah, so I think it is really important. That's a really important question, because many people, I think, also they think, oh, now I know the 2 questions of an affect diet. Here we go, we do it, right? But that will not have the effects I showed you, right? For these effects to show up, which I just showed you, like stress reduction and depression, you really need to have it as a skill learning exercise. And for that, you need to have trained dyad teachers. So I'm training these dyad teachers over months to become really good dyad teacher, because you have these weekly coaching sessions with certain coaching content. So it's not just random sessions, but it is really like an 8-week MBSR course or 8-week MBCT or self-compassion course also has content, which builds up on top of each other. And we developed, I have this book actually, under copyright in Max Planck. This is all the material we developed for the coaching of these dyadic sessions and the content. So we are teaching, for example, and that's very important for what the person asked, psychological safety. So we have onboarding sessions where we teach the do's and don'ts. So never interrupt. Everything you share stays in the dyad. Never talk about the content you heard outside of the dyad, like doctors would do with their patient, right? It's almost an oath. And we are training how to do dyad in breakout rooms with teacher watching in these onboarding session or retreats. When we do retreat, you see it, no? And then we coach people. What is body language? If you say, how did stress feel in your body? If you just say, oh, I felt stressed, that's not body language, right? The body doesn't know stress. It's a concept. So, we teach people to really go introception and like, oh, my stomach was contracting and I had sweaty hands and I had some contraction here. And then there was some heaviness behind here, my neck. So we really teach how to interocept in the body and what the body language is in comparison to conceptual or emotional concept, like, anger. I was angry, yes, but the body doesn't know the word anger. So we are having lots of coaching around that. We have a lot of coaching around social trigger, and that's the beautiful thing. But teachers need to learn that if they want to teach an 8-week diet course, because it's not like an MBSR program. It is the diet's tapping much more in the attachment system, because imagine someone comes late or someone forgets about the diet and you did everything to be punctual. In us human, there is a whole social conditioning pattern going off, right? Some people are conditioned and they think, oh my God, if she is not showing up, probably something happened. I have to call the leader of the course and probably she's in hospital and we have to do something, catastrophizing. Other people would have a totally different social conditioning pattern. She is not coming. That's probably because she doesn't like me. She would come punctual to this diet if it would be another person, right? So you take it personally, you think you are not worth it. So we are coaching also to become aware of these social patterns and social conditioning in your life, which can only be triggered by another person, right? And that's the beauty with the diet, is that you're looking at the whole social nature and conditioning of yourself, which is much more difficult to get when you are like meditating alone, because there's no trigger, waking all these patterns so easily up. But in a diet, it is much easier. However, it is also more important that the teacher know how to create this psychological safety container. And that's what we are doing in Train the Trainer. We teach the diet teacher what to be careful of and what to look for. And we are always having people behind the course, like the course teacher, right? It's me when I do masterclass together with 2 or 3 of my meditation teacher. I always teach together with meditation teacher. So people can call us if they have complaints about someone not behaving well in the diet. So we have this system where we can rematch people with different people if they don't feel easy. So we have a lot going on in the background, and people always underestimate when they hear my talks what real diet work means. It's really like a course, right? You need this whole know-how so that it becomes really a beautiful, deep, transformative experience.
Yes, you're weaving the social connection that everyone longs for and giving people the skills they may not previously have had. You spoke about the transition into the social application, and our final question is, have you applied the dyad model among communities who have political division and even legacies of conflict?
So I would love to do that. So far, I have not dared to really, recruit people who are clearly antagonistic, right? So like having, for example, now in Palestinian, Israeli in a diet, that I have not done, right? Like real conflict partners where I knew beforehand that they wouldn't be matched. But what happens naturally is, given that we are randomly pairing, so imagine now in the CovSocial project, we used a sample we have randomly assessed from the Berlin City Register. So you naturally had people from the left wing, people from the right wing. You have tube driver paired with president of a university taking part. You have young with old. So we had a huge amount of natural examples of people pairing, which usually come from totally different backgrounds, socio-economic backgrounds, but also ages, different, cultural backgrounds. And when that happens naturally, this is so beautiful because it is really peace building. They also say that this is really magic because it's so democratic. You don't have you don't have a hierarchy, you don't have a therapist or a guru, or, you just have two people and they change roles. So you're learning very quickly, because you don't want to be judged if it's your turn, to not judge the other either. And then you learn very quickly after the first 2 weeks, which might be a bit like, ooh, I'm a bit shy, and how will it be? And then you get very attached to if it runs well, to your diet partner. And so sometimes you grieve the diet partner when you have to change, right? But that we do explicitly because we want to cultivate shared humanity. We want to cultivate going over borders, over your judgments, over, prejudices. We want, to build a shared humanity.
And you are. Thank you. We actually have one more question that came in, if I may ask it. It asked, did you examine whether it makes a difference to do any of the practices outdoors in nature?
We didn't examine it explicitly, but because we do that every day with a cell phone, right? Or cell phone app, like in our studies, we have an app. Of course, some people are outdoor or in a coffee, or they're just traveling and then they take their spot, right? I don't know what is better. What is a bit problematic sometimes if you're too outdoor is that the internet connection is not good, or your cell phone connection. And that's not good for a diet. If the rhythm breaks up, it's a bit like, there is this cocoon and then this should not break up. So you can't really do it totally in the wilderness unless you have your diet partner with you and you just do it face to face, eye to eye. I think what we are teaching dietists also in these onboardings is to do the diet like a meditation, not like a chit chat. So we tell them, look for a space where you have total silence. Perhaps you take even your meditation cushion. You sit in a meditation pose, right? You're not like lingering on your sofa, eating something, drinking, right? We have all these do's and don'ts, and we are like really making sure that it is practiced like a contemplative practice. And for that, outdoor and, nature always helps, right?
Dr. Singer, thank you for nourishing us with the hope of the practical helpfulness of your research findings, and for your generosity of materials on your websites. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for those who were so awake early morning to listen to a talk. And goodbye.